Okay. Children of the Canyon tells the story of David, a boy growing up in Laurel Canyon in the 1970s as the counterculture is coming to an end. This selection is from a chapter called 7 in Heaven, which takes place in 1981 on the eve of David's birthday, which coincides also with the birth of MTV. Okay, Layla? Intimate. He'd spelled it out one night when they were playing Scrabble on her parents' frayed game board, the one on which someone had written in indelible marker, "No four-letter words allowed." They had just finished a heated argument about a word she'd sworn had come from her women's studies class, which had led to an overheated state of mutual half-undress, loose but still fastened underwear, and a light sheen of sweat and suntan lotion, the de facto uniform for all their summer games. "Define the term," she'd said softly and without looking up. He gazed at her smooth, caramel-colored leg pulled halfway up her other thigh, forming an isosceles triangle at her knee, and he'd done everything in his power to work through her question before realizing he didn't want to define the only word on the table that didn't feel like it was part of a game, something they could wipe the tiles away from and start all over again from the beginning. It's the opposite of intimate, of infinite. The universe is infinite. It has no boundaries, whereas something intimate has nothing but boundaries. Says who? Science. What if I think it's the other way around? What if I think the universe is intimate? Because just like it had to begin somewhere, it has to end somewhere. And that if you're really and truly intimate, there aren't any boundaries. The universe doesn't have to end somewhere. But maybe you're right about half the boundaries part. Everything important in the Big Bang, the foundational boundaries of the universe, happened during the first 3 minutes, which is exactly how long it takes for a woman to decide if she's going to be intimate with a man, she said, unable to stifle a giggle. Your women's studies teacher say that too? Actually, I read it in Cosmo. Mom's got a pile of them waist high. When I met you, you were waist high in the origin of species. Upside down, no less. And let me guess, now look at me. Good guess, I am. She'd met his eyes and stayed like that, and she'd allowed him to stare right back at her too, and there had been no need to say or do or even think anything, but he had anyway. He thought about his school's library, about how Seven's school had reciprocal study privilege, and about the librarian at his school who was known for walking noisy students over to a sign that read "Silence is golden," then smiling and saying nothing while pointing to the sign, making sure to do it right in front of everyone. The librarian had done this to David the only time Seven had ever met him there, when the two of them had argued too audibly over a game of hangman in her notebook. And the librarian had smiled just a little wider when she'd realized the extent of David's humiliation. Coming up with just the right word to play in this game of Scrabble, and the bliss of Seven's resulting wordlessness had made him want to find that librarian and tell her as loud as he pleased that this silence, this wordless infinite space in the cosmos, this was golden. This was how their arguments ended these days, with a mutually acknowledged electromagnetic tug from somewhere in the realm of the physical and an unspoken agreement to disagree about everything else. "Maybe no one will watch," offered David. "No way," scoffed Nicole. "I've already read like 3 magazine pieces about it. They're going to wind up cutting down a rainforest full of trees writing about it. Mark my words, this is one thing people are going to be watching." "I'd rather be watching 2 things," said Seven, as she wobbled to her feet and held up her glass. "A, you guys downing the liquid that I chilled to the perfect temperature before running it through cucumber and lime. And B, my boyfriend being feted the way an 18-year-old... She trailed off because, as far as David could tell, she didn't like where this was heading. "Because," she continued, "it's his last birthday." Her voice cracked, just a little, barely noticeable, but enough that it warranted a slight clearing of her throat. So, to 18, the end of immaturity, and the beginning of eternity. They drank, and Seven refilled everyone's shot glass, and they drank again, which was followed by a few more concoctions that Seven pulled out of her bag of tricks. By 10 o'clock, they were way past the drinking and socializing part of their night, but still 2 hours away from the part that was supposedly going to reshape the teenage universe as they knew it, which was when 7 suggested they all play a game. Sex was always the first thing everyone wanted to talk about, until it was the only thing left to talk about, and then nobody seemed to want to talk about it at all. And 7, for all her high-pitched volume potential, or gender-based or politically gender-based discourse, had been completely mum when it came to intercourse discourse. There had been a fair amount of tactile tentativity on both ends, even the slightest hint of some oral exploration, but everything had stopped just short of crossing any irrevocable thresholds, which had made David realize that he didn't even know what to ask, or, for that matter, whom to ask, if he had any questions about the subject, which, of course, he had nothing but questions about. And so David and 7 had ruminated endlessly about nothing in particular, and had said nothing in particular during their endless ruminations, but at the end of the day, they'd obeyed the rules and had allowed no 4-letter words on the board. How much time do we have left? Asked 7. David glances at the grandfather clock in the corner of the room. According to Gramps over here, 3 minutes. Ah, she says, to her eyes twinkling with a mixture of sarcasm and delight. The time it took for the Big Bang to form the universe. It wasn't the same 3 minutes, the same way you and I experience 3 minutes, says David. Time at that point was measured in 1 billion, 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 billion slivers called planks, see? So the time we've been here, right now, entire galaxies would have been formed back then. Sounds intimate. Like I said before, more the opposite. 7 pops her head up on her elbow and stares at David. Is something on your mind, she asks, but her knee is bobbing up and down. It's not that David doesn't want to say what he's been wanting to say, it's that he's back in the uncharted territory where he actually can't. Jesus, says 7. She rolls her eyes, then she sits up and slips out of her bra and underwear. Do you need a triple word score to spell it out? It had taken nearly a month before they'd seen each other for the second time. They were listed, and for the first thing he'd called, he'd practically hung up in between every ring, but it had been her voice he'd heard when the phone had been picked up eventually. And when her voice had recognized his on the other end, it had risen just a bit, and with a quiver to boot. They'd gone on like that for hours, for weeks, for any and every length of time that time had had available to throw their way. This, he'd always known, was what he would miss the most about her. That point of origin, when everything was only energy and not mass, when everything was possible and nothing was finite. Everything has to come to an end, whispered a little voice from somewhere in his waking brain. Even the universe. That's the whole point of the Big Bang Theory. He opened his eyes and looked over at 7, but she was fast asleep. David opens the door just after midnight, and the only 2 people in the living room are Tim, who's passed out on the floor, and Nicole, who's watching the launch of the music video channel. Where are Robbie and Kira? David asks. Upstairs in 7's room, says Nicole, staring straight ahead. He really does like her, says David. For some reason, he feels he owes her that. Nicole looks at the staircase, her eyes following it up into the space where the steps disappear. What goody gumdrops for him, she says. She turns back to the music channel on the TV, and she and David watch the ancient tube's fuzzy broadcast of the astronaut forging his way through the darkness to the big, bright light looming at the end of the cosmos.